I'm Frank Garza, and welcome to Here and Abroad, a podcast that follows the U.S. men's national team and their player pool across Europe, MLS, or wherever else they play their club football. With the Concacaf Nations League fresh on our minds, I thought it would be a good time to take a big picture look at the competition and the region as a whole. So on today's show, we're going to discuss the value of Nations League, who are some countries that have benefited from it, and what are some of the latest trends happening throughout the CONCACAF region. To help me do that, I've invited John Arnold to join the show. John is the creator of Getting CONCACAF, a newsletter featuring reported stories, features, and opinion on soccer in North America, Central America, and the Caribbean. He's covered CONCACAF for around a decade. John, welcome to the show. Are you CONCACAFinated and ready to go?
I am CONCACAFinated always, just in case. I've got another cup of coffee here, but it kind of comes all at once when we're talking about the international window, and there's so many stories that fly under the radar, even for me as someone who tries to pay a significant amount of attention to it. So you do have to be CONCACAFinated and ready. So hopefully we'll be able to give everyone energy heading into the bleak winter of no international soccer.
That's true. Well, I've had a lot of questions swirling in my mind about CONCACAF, so I've been looking forward to chatting with you. And I want to start by getting your opinion on the value of Nations League, because one of the things I hear every time Nations League rolls around from U.S. fans is, oh, we shouldn't be playing Nations League. We should be playing competitive friendlies against high-powered teams to test ourselves. I mean, as someone who follows the region so closely, I mean, do you think CONCACAF Nations League is valuable?
I think Nations League is obviously valuable for the smaller countries. So these teams that are in right now, League B, League C, absolutely, clearly, unequivocally, Nations League has been a huge success, getting those countries regular competitive matches. There were many, many examples of countries who right now, maybe we'll even talk about in a minute, as countries on a rise or just teams that are doing the right things, who previously, before Nations League, would play a qualifier or two every 4 years, and that was it. And, you see some of these legends of the Caribbean, and they've got like 10 caps or sometimes 20 caps, and it's just like, man, how did these guys not play 100 games? And it's because they were just not playing games. Teams were opting not to join competitions. They weren't qualifying for Gold Cup, so you don't play. I think the question is for the bigger teams, the US, Mexico, Canada, Panama, Costa Rica maybe, is it helpful for them? And I think previously the answer was maybe no. But right now, the answer is definitely yes, because, the alternative is what? Sure, playing competitive friendlies. That's what the U.S. did in September and October, but they played the only teams that were available. How helpful is it? How much are you going to grow toward the 2026 World Cup if you're just playing Mexico, New Zealand, and Canada every window? Right now, having these games that feel do or die, having the experience of going to Jamaica and playing in a difficult office, having to figure out how to manage a two-match series, I think is more applicable to what the U.S. is going to be doing in 2026 than if they were playing a friendly against these teams that are available. If you say, well, what if Brazil were available in England and France or Senegal or Ghana? Okay, sure. They're not available. Ghana actually is now, I think, because they didn't qualify for AFCON. But these teams are not around right now. So right now, in the micro, the Nations League is the best possible preparation, I think, for the U.S., Mexico, and Canada as they prepare to host the 2026 World Cup. So the long-term benefit is clear for the smaller nations. It's less clear for some of the bigger ones. But overall, I would say it's been positive. I think it's been really good. And while we talk about CONCACAF usually from this sort of top-down perspective, from that big team perspective, the Confederation's job is not to develop soccer in only the places where it's already somewhat developed. So I would say overall Nations League is something that has really worked out for the Confederation as a whole in these first couple of years.
I agree. I've enjoyed it as a fan. I mean, I enjoy seeing these home and away, two-legged quarterfinals where the U.S. has to go somewhere. I enjoyed it last year against Trinidad, enjoyed it this year against Jamaica. And then it's just another high-stakes semifinal, finals game. If for me as a U.S. fan, if the U.S. makes it that far, that they get to play in, that means something. And like you said, it's making the region better. And for me, it's kind of playing the long game. For the U.S. and Mexico, is that maybe it's not so helpful right now, but as the region gets better, it's going to help the U.S., Mexico, the bigger teams
No,
in the
absolutely.
region.
I think that middle class too of kind of Panama, although they seem top class right now. Costa Rica, Guatemala is one where there's, maybe they make a World Cup. Curacao, Suriname, some of these teams, like Suriname was relatively easily dispatched this time around after they made it to the Nations League quarterfinals. But if those teams, those types of teams don't get good, then the region never improves. And that's kind of the issue, right? Is how do you make these teams get good enough to where these matches feel like they matter? And look, credit to the U.S. for what they did against Jamaica, but even though the score lines looked good for the Americans, I don't think it was worthless to play the Reggae Boys, and they definitely have talent that is at the same level as some teams that will qualify for the World Cup. I think Jamaica themselves will qualify for the World Cup. And so when you're talking about how do we prepare for 2026, you're playing a team that should be at the World Cup. So, I mean, I think if you're talking about what does Jamaica look like 5 years ago, although they were playing more often than some of these nations I'm mentioning, Frank, your point is really solid where you're saying, hey, if these middle tier teams don't get better, the US doesn't get better. I think that's exactly right. Why abandon the idea that Jamaica or Panama or Guatemala could get to that level and just say, oh, we'll just play Brazil every week? Then, I don't think that's helpful for the global footballing world. Not to make it sound more important than it is, but just it's not good for national teams, right? So I think that's another great point you underlined.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of these countries that it has helped. You talked about some of these countries on the rise, that it has immediately helped some of these smaller countries. I mean, what have you seen since? I don't know how long it's been now for Nations League. What, 4 years, something like that, 4 or 5 years? I mean, what are some of the countries that you've seen really benefit from the competition?
Yeah, it's funny because it's been long enough, I think, to where there are countries that I thought. But that's also sports, right? The UEFA Nations League has the same, where there's some countries that had great runs. Switzerland was in the first ever Nations League Final Four in Europe. They're fine. They're a good team. They're probably in that mix where you'd say Panama and Costa Rica and Guatemala are right now. Um, so some countries I think have made big surges and then sort of drifted away. There's other teams or nations that I think are never going to be Gold Cup regulars, powers, teams that the U.S. plays. I'm thinking of St. Martin, both the French and the Dutch side. The Dutch side really strong, the French side somewhat strong. They've both really benefited from Nations League and both have earned promotions. They're not going to make the World. Well, they can't make the World Cup. But when you talk about getting regular games and getting in often and playing games, they've really benefited and been able to show that they do have talent, that they are kind of functioning members of CONCACAF. So some of those teams I think are hard to sort of quote unquote sell to people who want to hear about Nations League's benefit because that doesn't make the US, Mexico, Canada better. Going the other direction, even a team like Panama that was playing consistently, I think the fact that they've had this specific group in often after they missed out on the 2022 World Cup, they come back. Where do you get that momentum and energy from? Where's the bounce back? It's in Nations League. Twice now they've made the Nations League Final Four. They've done it by getting past their biggest rival right now, Costa Rica. And there's real benefit from that, right? So I think Panama is a team that's come kind of on the rise that U.S. fans have noticed. The number one that I would say is maybe flying under the radar right now is the Dominican Republic. They went perfect in their Nations League group, and they have used these consistent matches in Nations League to become a better national team, to put more structure in place. A lot of times when we talk about some of these national teams, we're talking about recruiting and can players who are eligible, but maybe they were born to a Dominican mother or father in another country, went through the academy system in one of those European countries that has strong player development. But with the Dominican, when I started to think about their roster and watch their matches, There are imports that have drawn a lot of attention. Junior Firpo, who plays in England, who was part of the Barcelona system for a long time, is like a name that a lot of people know. There's other big name recruits out there. Mariano Diaz is like this sort of will he, won't he? No one has ever been able to sort of suss out what exactly is on his mind. He played once back in the day, but hasn't been like a consistent presence. But they kind of don't need those guys right now. Junior Diaz did show up, so like he was in the roster, and they're going to get some other guys. But a lot of the players who form the base of the team are born in the Dominican Republic, and so I think that's a huge credit to what they're doing as a league, as a federation, and they are exporting a lot of these players. So just the fact that they've been able to do it sort of in a different way than we saw Curacao or Suriname with so many players who developed in foreign academies. The fact that the Dominican Republic went perfect in their Nations League group, qualified for the Gold Cup for the first time ever, I think it's really difficult for that train not to be on the tracks, right? Like the momentum is there. And now, after making the Olympics as well and making their first ever Gold Cup, you see this nation where you say, man, it's a baseball country. Everyone loves baseball there. But maybe if you're a kid, you start to see a path in professional soccer now. And that has real ramifications, not just this summer when they play in the Gold Cup, but in 10 years, in 15 years, in 20 years. So I think that's something that can be attributed in part to the Nations League, in part to their youth development work. But that's the thing too, is this all flows together. If you just try and win the Nations League, that's probably not going to go that well for you. But if you look at it holistically, I think it will. Some other countries that were like near misses, I think have really benefited from Nations League. St. Lucia didn't even try and qualify for the 2022 World Cup. They pulled out because of, I think, some controversy about, COVID regulations were a big problem and sort of thing that complicated life for a lot of people. Well, for all of us in 2020, but certainly for national federations. They nearly qualified for their first ever Gold Cup, had a couple really rough results that meant they didn't do well enough, but that's a team where, you say, it wasn't, it's not so long ago from the dark ages when these teams were playing every 4 years. St. Lucia literally was one of those teams 2 years ago, and now all of a sudden they were a result away from the Gold Cup. And Puerto Rico is another one where, because of the colonial situation, essentially, where every Puerto Rican is American, you have a lot of Puerto Ricans who are eligible that are in the U.S. in a lot of USL academies, a lot of MLS academies, really young players. They looked like they might have their first spot. They were in a group with Haiti, which makes it really difficult because Haiti's a really, really good team. But I think they're on the rise as well. Long term, it's taken a little bit of time for the line to start going in the right direction, but it's pointing upward, and I think will continue to point up if the federation continues to manage things in a wise way. So I think the Dominican is like a clear example that we're going to see next summer. St. Lucia and Puerto Rico just missing out are other sort of opportunity or examples. And then some of these tiny, tiny countries have really benefited, but again, it might not be so tangible for them.
So the Dominican, Puerto Rico, St. Lucia, are they in League B right now?
All those teams were League B, so the Dominican will get promoted.
So they're moving up to League A next year.
We'll come up to League A, yeah.
Okay.
And playing the Gold Cup. So, it's exciting, and some of the teams that are in the prelims as well, teams that did well in League C or that were runner up in League B, like St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I think is another team that's going in the right direction. They've got Ezra Hendrickson, former MLS manager, leading the way. There's a lot of good projects. It's hard sometimes to not kind of be wooed by a small sample size, but it's what we got. International soccer, they don't play that often. So I think that a lot of these League B teams are going in the right direction, and some of the League A teams too. It's just like I said, like Panama, like there's not as big of a gap for them to jump, but it seems like they're trying to jump that gap and really contend with the North American teams.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting. I don't know if I've ever watched the Dominican Republic in a match, just because they haven't been, like you said, in the Gold Cups and these other competitions, playing the U.S., Mexico, or Canada, and so I'm excited to check them out. Let me ask you about kind of if there's any sleeping giants kind of waiting around that could move into the, I'm going to put U.S., Mexico, Canada, kind of maybe at that top tier right now. Some people may throw Panama in there as well, but I'm thinking about somebody like a Canada, who 5 years ago, I mean, you look at the last 2022 World Cup qualifying cycle. I mean, they were like, correct me if I'm wrong, but they started at the very bottom of qualifying and had to like win all of these games just to make it into the final eight, and ended up finishing first. And now they seem like a contender every year for the Nations League. I mean, are there any countries like Canada out there that you could see making a meteoric rise in the next 5, 10 years?
Yeah, I think there's like a couple different countries for a couple different reasons. So Canada is like a great confluence, I think, of having really good professional teams that have academies that care about player development. We see what Toronto FC, Montreal sometimes, despite themselves, the Vancouver Whitecaps, those teams all produce players and can point to players on the current Canada senior men's national team that they've developed that are top players and that they made a lot of money in most cases selling. Obviously, think about Alphonso Davies, but there's great prospects that have come out of Toronto and Montreal as well. They have those pro clubs, but they also have this sort of, at least for now, immigration friendly government where, again, Alphonso Davies, like his parents come and he's Canadian. A lot of the other guys who are either Canadian because they moved there when they were young or their parents are parents of immigrants, that kind of thing. So I think you can go kind of in those two routes, and if they can come together, all the better for making a national team better really quickly. So you look at Suriname, you look at Curacao. These are Dutch, former Dutch colonies that can often they can get a lot of these guys to play for them, who are eligible because of their parents or grandparents and are currently playing in the Netherlands. A lot of them have come up through top academies like Feyenoord, like Ajax, like PSV. And that does put them a step ahead of a lot of the countries they're playing against. So, Trinidad and Tobago, for instance, does not have that history of development. If you take a kid who's 18 years old, who's come through the Ajax Academy, you take another one who's 18 years old and he was playing schoolboy football and then maybe played in the Trinidad and Tobago Pro League for 2 years, typically the Dutch formed kid is going to have way more advantages because he's been getting top coaching from a young age. He's been getting the advice about how to lift weights, to eat right, to have the proper nutrition, to be a great player. So Suriname, I think, is ahead. Their question is like, if the federation is going to be sort of competent enough to actually keep the same players coming in, to keep players happy that are coming in. I really thought Curacao was kind of going to be that team, and the federation has been inconsistent, and it's led to the fact that Curacao is kind of no longer occupying that perch. The Suriname is a candidate for sure, just because of the ability now to field these dual nationals. I wrote a couple of years ago that wasn't possible, that Suriname used to not issue passports to anyone who held a different passport. So you would have had to renounce your Dutch citizenship, which no one wanted to do. It's not appealing to someone who is functionally Dutch. I think that another big contender beyond Suriname that could sort of take a leap is Guatemala. They have a similar sort of situation to Canada in a way. Their clubs are not as good, but they have some very big clubs that are working in a good direction. Comunicaciones and Municipal, the traditional big teams. But then even some of the teams that are competing right now in the Guatemalan League, Antigua is one. They're going to be in the Concacaf Champions Cup in 2025. Gelaju does a good job in the northwest. I don't want to get it wrong, but far away from the capital. So there's like some significant player development there, and there's a fair amount of Guatemalan eligible kids and players in the U.S. So you've seen them, familiar names to MLS fans like Aaron Herrera now playing regularly for the Guatemalan national team. Rubio Rubin had the option to play for a couple of different teams and ended up joining the Guatemalan cause. There's several others who are in that category. So I think that they're a team, especially with Luis Fernando Tena, the manager from Mexico, who won the Olympic gold medal with Mexico. Their goal has been to get to 2026. There was some frustration that they weren't able to get past Costa Rica and get into the Nations League quarterfinals. but I think they're on the right path. I think that's a slow and steady wins the race. And when you look at the population of these countries in Central America, Guatemala is a big, big, big country, especially compared to some of its regional rivals. So I think that just that player pool should sort of help them become a country that can take a step. I don't think they're going to become Canada, but I do think that they'll be a team that once again is relevant in the region. I think the echoes of that FIFA suspension, they were suspended from FIFA. They weren't able to play games for quite some time. About 5 or 6 years that got lifted, I want to say. So I think that ban is still resonating a bit. But when you look at the player pool, the fact that they're producing young players through these clubs and the ability to draw on immigration, I think Guatemala is a team that I see on the rise. So I'll say Suriname, Guatemala, and again, like I'm gonna again circle Puerto Rico. There's just so much potential there because it's a baseball island. They love baseball, but I think soccer is becoming more and more popular there. I think people have sort of figured out that there could be a path there to Puerto Rico being a very good men's and women's national team. So I think that's another one where they could be on the rise if they get kind of the right people in place. And that's a big if, and it's a big question. But when you're talking about how do you get better over 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, even the German Federation before they won the World Cup had to sort of have these moments of reckoning, this moment of a long-term plan. And despite that sort of blueprint being there, in the region, it's so hard with all the political factors, with people, we've been doing it this way for this many years. This club doesn't want to put this money in. They want the federation to put this money in. FIFA needs to put this money in. Concacaf needs to put this money in. You can get bogged down in so many of these things that are important. But governance matters when we're talking about making a long-term plan. So I guess that'll be my trio: Suriname, Guatemala, Puerto Rico, and there's if we saw them all coming, then they wouldn't be as fun when they did emerge onto the scene. So I think that, if someone's mad that I've left their country out, prove me wrong.
Well, I want to ask you about one. What's your thoughts about Haiti? Because I got interested in them as a football nation when a couple years ago, Violette beat Austin FC in the Concacaf Champions League, and I started doing some research. I mean, they're the most populous country in the Caribbean, so you would think they have a lot of, I know that doesn't always work out, but I think about it as the more higher population you have, maybe the more resources and bigger player pool that you have. And I've seen them in Gold Cups before and thought they played well. I mean, what do you think about Haiti's potential?
The potential is there as a soccer team. They just went undefeated in their Nations League group. It wasn't even close. They got back in League A. It's clearly a team that typically belongs in League A. It was, I think, a bit of a fluke that they fell out of League A. The thing there is the administration. I mean, Haiti as a country right now is in a really difficult spot. And every time I say that, it gets worse and worse and worse. I did a newsletter with someone who's become an acquaintance, a friend of mine, named James Louis Charles, who runs an academy in Haiti. He works in development and is there for sort of, well, not anymore. It became too dangerous to be there, but he was there for, doing big picture things beyond soccer, but use soccer as part of his youth development and runs this academy called Juvenal. And they can't run right now. They can't tell kids to come play soccer. And the whole point was kind of giving them a safe place to play soccer because the streets weren't safe. That being said, the resilience of the Haiti men's and women's senior national teams, the youth national teams, and some of these clubs, Real Hope, could still qualify for the CONCACAF Champions Cup. To be able to do that without having not just home field advantage, without essentially having home, is remarkable. Some of the clubs are from Cap Haitian and some of the places where it's like a little better and there's more infrastructure and it's a little less difficult day to day, but still, these clubs are not able to play in Haiti. The national team is not able to play in Haiti. I wrote in the recent newsletter, typically I kind of roll my eyes and sneer whenever someone suggests playing more games in the US. We already have every single World Cup here. The Nations League Final Four is always here. Every, European team comes to play here. The Club World Cup is going to be here. Well, don't get me wrong, I like going to soccer. It's just that soccer is for everyone, and I want there to be more games in more places. I think Haiti should post up in Miami and say, this is our home. We're going to play in Chase Field or whatever venue they can find, because that immigrant community, I think, would show up to support. And that's going to be a factor for Haiti's national team potential, right? There are so many Haitians who have to leave right now. Eventually, those kids who right now are leaving difficult situations and finding comfort in the beautiful game, a lot of them are going to become good players and be able to be professionals and then join the national team. The national team right now, a lot of their base is players who are in France who are eligible. There's players who are eligible from Canada, from the United States, from all sorts of different places where Haitians have had to kind of start their lives over in a lot of situations. And even then, you still have players who are from Haiti, who are actually from the country, who are going through and getting out in that difficult situation. So it's a good shout for sure, Frank. I think like they are a team that is worth keeping an eye on. It is possible that they are able to sort of bootstrap their way to success. But man, it's also a huge ask when you don't have that infrastructure, not the soccer governing body, although they are also in a very bad situation. Very bad things happened there in the past with the federation president. People can read up on that, and I've written about that as well. Now hopefully getting out and turning the page, but it's hard enough, I guess, when your governing body is in chaos. When your entire country is in chaos, I think it's even more difficult. So I absolutely give a huge amount of credit to the current group of Haitian players that, despite not playing a single game on home soil, were clearly the best team in their Nations League group, and now look toward World Cup or Gold Cup, maybe the World Cup. And it's a country that has a lot of potential, both as a sporting country and also as a country.
As a country, yeah.
But I do think that like the international community, such that it exists, like has to do a better job. I really do encourage people to listen to James and some of the other people that are trying to do the work there. He that newsletter was really moving to me because we were speaking. He was saying, look at the different crises around the world. Gaza, we don't know how we're going to solve that. Ukraine, we don't know how we're going to solve that. He said in Haiti, it's not like a military or situation. We need money, and people got to send funds, man. I mean, you or I, can we do our small part? Yeah, of course. But like the governments have to help Haiti out of this economic crisis, because right now the gangs are taking over. Kids who are as young as 8, but typically teenagers, would they rather kick a ball or hold a gun? Usually they'd rather kick a ball, but if you don't give them that opportunity, they're going to have to pick up the gun. It sounds like kind of crazy, but it really is that serious, and I hope people can kind of understand. And so anything that the men's national team does is remarkable, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's tough. That's challenging. Well, thanks for that. Definitely understand more what's going on there now. Next place I want to go is players. I'd like to get a feel from you who are some maybe like young potential stars, in CONCACAF. And I'm talking about people outside of, some of the more known countries like the US, Mexico, Canada, even Panama, Costa Rica, countries like that. I mean, who are you seeing in some of these smaller nations that you think could potentially turn into stars?
Yeah, I think Donny Romero is one. He had a 4-goal performance for the Dominican Republic in this last one. Interesting, like club situation. There's like sort of a secret pipeline from the Dominican Republic to Bolivia. A lot of Dominicans are playing in the Bolivian league. It's a little higher quality. You get the chance to maybe go into South American soccer. And you jump from there to Kazakhstan. So, yeah, that's where he's at. But I guess that could put you in the window for some top European teams. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe. Who knows? In Puerto Rico, Jeremy De Leon is one. He's in the Real Madrid system right now. Leandro Antonetti is another one. He's in the Sevilla system. So those two guys coming out of Spain, well, coming out of Puerto Rico, I feel like I'm kind of circling those countries a lot. I wonder if I can get out of those countries. Like there's some interesting guys in like Guyana. That's an interesting place as well to kind of keep an eye on, just because their lives are changing with like increased oil wealth, and I think the federation is sort of starting to professionalize. I don't. There's not like one or two that I like really have seen right now that I would sort of spotlight, but yeah, it's like on the one hand they're absolute ballers who are playing for these countries. On the other, it's like a little hard sometimes to say like, oh, yeah, this guy he's gonna be it, because I could definitely see. Like I did a story on Gerwin Lake, who's like the forward for St. Martin, the Dutch side Sint Maarten, and he plays amateur in Rotterdam and works like in logistics, and then he comes for the national team and scores goals. And he's not going to be a star, like he's not going to go play for Chelsea, but he's going to be a Concacaf star, I guess. Like it's an interesting distinction to sort of draw, but I think like some of those guys who are not going to be playing uh, top level or even professional full time, maybe, are sort of like in a lot of ways like the stars of some of these CONCACAF teams. And maybe that has to change too, right? Like maybe that's something where as there are more and more national team games, these guys get seen younger. These guys then go to better teams, get better coaching, that kind of thing. But yeah, I feel like I'm shorting a lot of great ballers, but yeah.
Well, what I'm hearing from you, so there's a lot of, good footballers, solid players, contributors. Maybe not right now a lot of like European Champions League quality players.
Yeah, or if they are, they're already there. Like I
Yeah.
think it is interesting that as scouting expands, there are some guys who you look and every single window they're playing well, and you're like, man, like I bet this guy's going to get picked up by a big club or an MLS team or something like that, and then it just doesn't really happen. But a lot of it is that the scouting has really taken to. I think most listeners will understand, but maybe people don't. Scouting has taken a huge step forward with more video being available, with more analytics being available. Like you can really, really suss out what a player is about and what he can do in a short amount of time now, thanks to tools like Y Scout or Instat with the video scouting, and then looking at the underlying data that a lot of these leagues now have. So there are fewer and fewer diamonds in the rough a lot of times. I think what we're going to see is more late bloomers, guys who maybe were dismissed by a couple different clubs or even failed at a club and washed out, and then sort of maybe get another chance, or they're playing for a lower division. And sometimes I think people look at like Isaac Hayden, right, the midfielder for Jamaica. He's he's on the books at Newcastle. He doesn't play, and he committed for Jamaica. He's British passport, English passport, but also eligible for Jamaica. He played in Jamaica this window. I think people sort of, oh, you're just using us, right? You're just using us to get minutes and to get a better club situation. Um, but sometimes that is okay. Like it's okay to sort of have a player find his rhythm at the national team and get a different club situation. And maybe you realize, oh, we threw this guy in the scrap heap because he wasn't good enough for Newcastle, but it turns out he is good enough for wherever he ends up next. So.
Yeah. Well, last thing I want to ask you about before we go here is you mentioned the pipeline earlier for some of these players, and that's another thing I'm curious about is some of this emerging talent in Central America and the Caribbean. Where do you see them? I mean, I know everybody wants to end up in Europe, right? But like, do you see any trends to where they're going to play their club football, whether it's more Liga MX, more MLS, more South America? I mean, what do you see in there?
Yeah, I think that South America and Central America are going to play an increasingly important role, an interesting role when we talk about the club sort of future of a lot of the guys in the Caribbean. I think some of those clubs are getting kind of picked over early. Again, some of their younger stars are going either to MLS or to Europe younger than ever. But that also gives them a little bit of money to sign players. And I think some of the clubs who are a little bit more innovative are starting to see, oh, we could get some of these guys who are balling out in the Nations League, and they're probably good enough for our standard. So I think that is one. I think that as MLS sort of restructures with Next Pro and with just even MLS Next and the college game, that's been a path for players that's sort of not as, it's not flowing as fast right now, if you want to put it in pipeline terms, but I think it's about to start flowing again. I think there's a lot of these guys who are getting really early playing time in Nations League for their national teams who are going to get picked up by either a good U.S. college and then potentially get seen by an MLS team and go draft or just get picked up. Or I think that there's a lot of teams in England, especially in the championship and the lower divisions, that are starting to scout some of these guys, many of them who have an English passport already or could get one quite easily. So I think that's another sort of potential trend. Like there's a lot of guy like Manfred Ugalde is like in Russia now from Costa Rica. He went through the city. It wasn't like a big he wasn't a big secret. He was like scouted by top teams and went to top teams. So, that wasn't a secret, but like, I think there are a fair amount of Latin American players who are willing to go to Russia at a time where other players are not. I don't know that that's going to be a huge trend just because there's only so many Russian teams that have money that want to bring in foreign players, but I think that's something like interesting to keep an eye on. But overall in the region, I would say really the tiny countries, maybe you'll start seeing more in Central America and South American clubs, but really a lot of it is what is MLS doing? For a while in 2014, for instance, like ahead of that World Cup, we said, well, Costa Rica, Panama, like the base of these national teams is in MLS, and MLS sort of gave them this opportunity where these guys are better. These guys are kind of too good to play in the Costa Rican domestic league or the Panamanian, certainly the Panamanian league, which is in a really bad situation right now, or the Salvadoran league, but they're not good enough maybe to play in France or Spain. So MLS is like kind of giving them an opportunity to challenge themselves to get better. I think we saw that go away for a minute, but I think it's kind of back. And the other thing that's interesting is the other trend I see is MLS developing players who are first generation immigrant, and then they go to the national team at a young age. So like Nathan Ordaz, I believe is his name, from LAFC, gets called up by El Salvador. He's been getting youth calls for many years. He has options, but El Salvador has always been where he's at, and now he's a senior El Salvador player. So I think that's going to be an increasing trend as well, just with the demographics of the United States, with how many young kids we have who are coming through soccer academies that are Mexican-American, Guatemalan-American, Salvadoran-American, Panamanian-American, whatever it is. I think a lot of the federations are wisely recruiting and sometimes even having open events in the U.S. Hey, are you eligible? Turn up. We're going to watch you. We're going to put you through your paces, see if you might have the quality, maybe give you an invite. I went to an event a couple years ago that was a Salvadoran women's team. Open tryout. Are you Salvadoran girl? Come. And then they ended up inviting several players to a youth camp. Some of those girls are already on the senior women's national team, and they just turned up to a tryout. I mean, it sounds kind of insane, but that is smart scouting in 2024.
All right. Well, lots happening in the region, John. Thank you so much for sharing all of that today. I will make sure and put links in the show notes to your work at getting Concacaf. And where are you pointing to? Which socials are you pointing to nowadays that you'd like people to go follow you at?
I'm going to go to TikTok, JON Arnold FC. I don't dance, but I talk about soccer on there, and it's fun.
All right. Thank you so much, John.
My pleasure. Thanks, Frank.
And thanks to everyone for listening to Here and Abroad. If you enjoyed the episode, please do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, or the follow button if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or somewhere else. Thank you so much. I'm Frank Garza. You can follow me on X at FrankGarza007, and I'll be back next week with a new episode.